Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode here on I've Got 10 as we continue our podcast series with the Dental Consultant Connection. Very excited to be with you this morning on this Valentine's Day. So, we have a very interesting topic to go over on this Valentine's Day, but it is a real honor to have David Harris, who is the CEO of Prosperident, with me on I've Got 10 this morning. Good morning, David.
Good morning, John. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. And thanks for joining us. I know you come to us all the way from Nova Scotia or Halifax, Canada, which is such a beautiful part of the world. So love it up there.
Thank you. Well, it's not looking terribly warm outside my window today, but it'll get better.
Excellent. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is one of those topics that isn't always the easiest to talk about, address, but it's real. And I know David and his company certainly are the experts when it comes to this in the dental profession. And so wanted to have him on and share with you we're going to call them highlights, because as David and I were speaking before the podcast, this topic is very heavy. There's a lot of detailed things certainly that David could get into, and asking him to do this in 10 minutes is a challenge by itself. But what we will do, as you all know, is we're going to have an audio podcast after this, where David and I will go ahead and record on the Digital Trade Show Dental Audio Podcast. So we're going to get into a little bit more detail of some of his content when it comes to dental embezzlement and things like that. So we'd love to have you check that out. But for this morning, David's going to share, he's got like 4 kind of high-level areas that he's going to share with all of you in regards to embezzlement. So David, the floor is yours.
Oh, goodness. Well, maybe I'll start by talking about misconceptions. And a lot of people misunderstand some things about this topic. For example, when I talk to dentists about embezzlement, what's in their mind inevitably is the theft of cash. And I'll be very clear that thieves love to steal cash. But in 2019, technology has advanced to the point where a lot of the stealing that we're seeing is actually theft of checks payable to the doctor or even credit card payments. So we need to be a little bit broader than just thinking about cash. A second misconception is that embezzlement is, and I'm going to use this word very deliberately, preventable. If you go on the web and you search for dental embezzlement, you'll see a lot of articles by people along the lines of 4 things you can do in your practice to prevent embezzlement. When somebody says that, they don't quite get it. And what people want to do here is analogize to types of crime they understand better, like, let's say, burglary. A burglar alarm is really good at protecting your house against being broken into. It doesn't prevent burglary, but it redirects it to some other victim. The difference between burglary and embezzlement is that it's really easy to change victims when you're a burglar. When you're an embezzler, it's a big deal. You have to quit your job. You have to find a job with a different doctor and invest enough time and gain enough understanding of how that doctor functions to be able to steal. So, for me to switch victims is probably a 6 to 9 month proposition. And I've never met an embezzler who's that patient. So what thieves can control is not really their choice of victim when we're talking about embezzlement, it's their choice of methodology. So I see a lot of stuff that says, if you take the bank deposit to the bank yourself, you'll prevent embezzlement. No, what you'll prevent is embezzlement by a certain methodology. If somebody's in your practice and they want to steal from you, they're just going to look for a different way to do it. And chances are pretty good that they'll find it. Another one of the misconceptions that I hear a lot is the report that comes out of my practice management software. If I check that against my bank deposit at the end of each day and they line up, there's no possible way embezzlement is going on. And really where this belief comes from is that If it comes out of my computer, it must be true. I suspect that when I put it that way, people will start to rethink it a little bit. But it's not hard as an embezzler to cook the books, to make it so that the bank deposit does line up to the practice management software's report, and yet at the same time, money's still missing. So if your day sheet balances to your deposit, what that really means is whoever's at your front desk knows how to add. It doesn't necessarily mean any more than that. If they don't line up with each other, you have a problem. If they do, you may have a problem. Another of the misconceptions is if my staff have been with me forever, I'm immune. And fundamentally, John, there are two kinds of embezzlers. There are those who start stealing more or less from the day they're hired at a practice. And typically they've done this somewhere else and got fired there. And now they've gotten a new job and they start stealing again. And then there are people who have been with the practice for a long time, and sometimes it's 5 years, sometimes it's 25 years. And something happens in their life that flicks a switch, and then they start stealing. I often tell audiences that embezzlers are motivated by one of two factors, need or greed. Mm-hmm. So need means there's a financial imbalance in their household, and there's more money going out each month than what's coming in, and we all know that's not sustainable. And the needy thief is stealing because they have to pay the mortgage payment, mm-hmm. or they're going to lose their house. Greedy thieves steal to address an emotional itch and not a financial one. Mm-hmm. So they're stealing because really they feel like society hasn't properly rewarded their talents.
Right.
And they deserve more than what they're being paid and working in the dental practice, and they steal to take what they're worth. And when they spend the money, they spend it a little bit differently. Needy thieves are buying groceries and, as I said, paying the mortgage and the car payment and things like that. Greedy thieves, when they steal, they flaunt the money. They'll buy expensive concert tickets. They'll take vacations. They'll get cosmetic surgery. Mm-hmm. They will buy expensive clothes. You know, they're doing things that, in their mind, elevate them a little bit over where they would otherwise be. Mm-hmm. So that can happen to anybody. And we've seen cases of employees who worked for a practice for 25 years and in the 25th year started embezzling.
Interesting.
Most dental offices don't really have a whole lot of post-retirement income for employees. I mean, they typically don't have things like pension plans. So I think one of the factors in long-term employees starting to steal is insecurity about retirement.
Right.
What would you like me to address next on the list?
Yeah, I think the next thing that we were going to talk about is why the conventional wisdom doesn't always work.
Absolutely. And this is back to the concept that this can be, quote, prevented. I describe it sometimes as the hard target fallacy, the idea that if we just make it hard for people to steal, they won't try. And I think every dentist has had frustration at some point in their life trying to get staff to do something really basic. One I hear a lot is it's tough to get staff to answer the phone in the way I want them to. So if you have trouble doing that, and it's something relatively inconsequential that has no financial implications at all for the employee, think about the trouble you're going to have getting them to behave in a certain way when doing it means they can't steal. So all the rules that you can come up with, all of the procedures you can put in place, all the checks and balances, would never say any of those things are bad ideas, but they're not going to stop a thief of average creativity. So the concept that we can just prevent this if we put some rules in place is fallacious.
Right. Right. How about certainly I know there's when we're talking about this, talking about the rules, we had talked about 5 things. I'm sure there's certainly a list of others, but we had talked about 5 things, that a dentist could do to protect himself or herself when it comes to setting up a program or however it would be to, like you said, at least do what they can to protect themselves against this.
Absolutely. The first thing to start with is hiring properly. Dentists in general tend to trust what applicants tell them. 2 statistics that the audience should know about. The first one is that 60 million US adults, so that's 1 in 4 adults, have criminal records. I'm also going to drop another 60 number on you. Studies suggest that about 60% of resumes have some amount of false information. So when you're talking to somebody who's applying for a job with you, there's a decent possibility that, first of all, they have a criminal record, which may not be the end of the world, but we better know about it and we better understand what the origin of it is. And secondly, that they're not telling us the truth about things like past employment. So verification is important. I talk to audiences of dentists all the time, and I ask them, how many of you drug test applicants before you hire them? And I would say in a typical audience, 5% do. And to the other 95%, I say, well, let's be a little bit analytical about this. I can't get a job with FedEx or UPS delivering the stuff people buy on Amazon without a drug test, and yet I can work in your practice. And unlike Amazon or UPS, your practice has a prescription pad sitting right there. So you're going to hire me having no idea if I have a cocaine addiction. When I talk to dentists about background checking, what they think I'm talking about is checking for a criminal record. And to me, that's a subset. Criminal record's important to check, but we also need to verify with former employers. We need to drug test, typically do a credit check. And to most dentists, when they hear about these things, they're a good idea, but they just had never come up with that concept on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Second piece of advice I'll give your audience is to get in the habit of printing the reports that they want to look at from their software themselves. As soon as you allow somebody else to print a report for you, the possibility you create is selective reporting. So you think you're getting the whole story, and in fact, you're not. And a lot of dentists kind of would like to make it through their whole career without learning the first thing about their practice management software. And what I say to them is that software is as important, probably even more important to your financial well-being than your handpiece. And one of those tools you embrace, and the other one you wish would just vanish from the planet. The third thing is there are some reconciliations that need to be done each month, but here's the important part: by somebody external to the practice. So the doctor can do it, a bookkeeper, an accountant, somebody who's offsite, but staff cannot. And what I'm talking about is reconciling reports from practice management software against the practice's bank account, what's called the merchant terminal account. So this is from the machine in the practice that accepts credit cards. And if there's external financing in use like Care Credit or Lending Club, their stuff. So those need to be reconciled against software. As I said, not hard to cook the books, but if you're not doing that basic check, then you make it very easy for a thief, and I don't think that should be what we set out to do. Fourth tip is almost every practice has an alarm system the alarm company will happily send the doctor each month what's called the access log. So that's the report from the software of, the report from the alarm system of who came and went when. Take 5 minutes a month and check that. And what it will tell the doctor is if somebody is coming in at strange hours. Because if they are, that's a symptom of embezzlement. And the fifth piece of advice is make everybody take vacation. If staff are stealing and they're using certain embezzlement patterns, they'll be really reluctant to take vacation. Mm-hmm. It has to be done when the practice is open, and do not let people take their 2 weeks of vacation in a whole bunch of long weekends. Mm-hmm. I want every staff member gone from the practice when it's open for 2 weeks. Because if something untoward is going on, that's one of the best windows for discovery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And, the one thing I wanted to go back to real quickly is when you talked about the hiring and I'm curious, David, in so many cases, as you know, when a practice has to hire somebody, it's not always at the ideal time, right? And I'm sure you see this a lot, but in any ideal business, you would love to have that time period where you could do all of these different things. But I think a lot of times in a dental practice, if a dental assistant or hygienist or office manager leaves for whatever reason, as you see a lot of times, there's that urgency to get somebody in there, fill the chair, see the patients. And I would have to think it's in situations like that's when these things kind of get left off a bit.
You nailed it. And here's my response. Every dentist understands the concept of a short notice list for patients. Why aren't we doing the same thing for staff? Mm-hmm. In other words, why do we start our hiring process completely cold when somebody says to us on a Thursday, I've taken a new job and I won't be in on Monday?
Right.
Particularly with front desk staff who don't need any specific qualification to work in a practice, we should be looking for them all the time.
Right.
We all encounter people in our daily lives who would be perfect for our front desk. So let's start tagging those people mentally, or maybe even saying to them, if you ever want to change job from what you're doing now, I'd love to talk to you. A lot of dentists will only hire from within dentistry, and you can't do otherwise with a hygienist.
Sure.
But when you look at front desk staff, they need two attributes. I mean, they need to understand dental terminology and insurance and how to use software. And we want them to be outgoing, bubbly people. Right. Of those two attributes, which is more trainable and which one kind of has to be innate? You can't easily turn an introvert into an extrovert.
Right.
But you can take somebody with the right aptitude and personality and in relatively short time, mm-hmm. teach them to function at a dental front desk. Yeah. So proactive hiring or proactive seeking people to hire when you need them is, to me, a great way not to get caught in the trap of, I need somebody Monday and therefore I will take anybody with 2 feet and a heartbeat.
Right. Yeah. Which, as you said, I think in a lot of these cases, as you've done this work over all these years, I'm sure in every example that you've given, there is the root cause, right? It allowed you to go back and identify some of those root causes to really kind of track things through. And that information, I think, is so valuable when we talk about something like this, because
there's a cohort out there called serial embezzlers, and they have stolen from one or more practices in the past, and now they're targeting you. The champion, over about a 9-year period, interrupted by a 2-year prison sentence, worked for 15 different doctors and probably stole from every one of them. Yeah. So the easiest thing to do is not hire one of these people.
Right.
The challenge is that they're lying to you about past employment. They're giving you phone numbers for former employers that are actually a disposable cell phone with their uncle. They're playing all kinds of games so that you don't get in touch with the people who they really work for, who are going to say, there's no chance I'd hire that person again.
Yeah. All right, so what we're going to do, David, I've got up on the screen. If any of you want to learn more about this, what I would consider a great service in regards to what David does, Dental Consultant Connection. There's some information about David right there on the website. I had that up on the screen, dentalconsultantconnection.com. I've got a phone number up there right now if you want to go ahead and call to reach out, learn more about David and how you could utilize his services. And what we're going to do as we wrap here in the video podcast is, like I said, we're going to go ahead and record the audio podcast because one of the things we want to talk about on the audio podcast we didn't get today is the do's and don'ts of when it's discovered or what have you, and some tips on what you can do there. So we're going to kind of go through everything that David went through, but I'm glad we took a little extra time on this. I think it's very, very important, and certainly to sum this up in 10 minutes, I just would not have done justice to the severity of this, the detailed perspective that David has over all of his years of experience. So I'm glad we did this. And David, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast this morning. This has been great.
My pleasure. Great to be here. And thanks to you and Dental Consultant Connection.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, everybody have a wonderful Valentine's Day, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, David.
Okay, John.